The member from Nipissing.
Thank you, and good morning, Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance. This morning, the Financial Accountability Officer confirmed what we here have been saying for months. This government is using one-time money from the sale of assets, contingency funds, and tax increases to try to balance their budget. Yet the FAO says they'll still come up short in 2017-18, and he forecasts a $600 million deficit. He says this will grow as large as $3.5 billion by 2020 if economic growth changes even slightly. When asked about whether this government is properly balancing the risks, the FAO said, quote, "We don't believe this fiscal plan does." Speaker, will the minister finally admit there's a structural deficit in Ontario?
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the Financial Accountability Officer for his report. We collaborated with the Financial Accountability Officer, and his forecasts and recommendations and the risks that he highlights is appropriate, and we're mindful of them. That's why we take the actions and the prudent measures that we've achieved. And, Mr. Speaker, I quote, and he says that the government has the ability and is able to balance its deficit, and the government is doing just that in 2017-18 and the year after that. And on this side of the House, we're committed to balancing the books and ensuring that we grow the economy and create more jobs. He goes on to say that, and I quote, Ontario's economy will outperform the rest of Canada in 2016. He says over the next several years, most economic forecasters, including the FAO, expect Ontario economy will grow at a solid pace, supported by strong gains in international exports and business investments. Mr. Speaker, we're taking the necessary actions. We are growing the economy. We're balancing the books next year and the year after that.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Back to the minister. I'm surprised he suggested they collaborated, Speaker. The FAO says they were blocked with, quote, cabinet confidentiality at every turn. The FAO was clear, quote, this fiscal plan is not evenly balanced. Quote, most risk is on the downside. He also said he has, quote, serial disappointment in the government's projections. Wow. Speaker, their forecasts have missed the targets in each of the past 5 years.
Order.
That means without selling assets, they won't meet revenue targets. Speaker, after 2018-19, the FAO projects a deterioration in the province's budget balance with a deficit of $1.7 billion by 2020. That's in his report. Speaker, he also forecasts net debt will continue to skyrocket with $54 billion added. So my question is, will the minister admit that government waste, scandal and mismanagement is hurting Ontario?
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the FAO, who used outside external support to establish his forecast, I also note that the credibility of the 2016 budget is on fiscal plan. In fact, Moody's recently upgraded Ontario's credit rating outlook based on our government's economic and fiscal plan. And the Conference Board of Canada indicated that a balanced budget in 2017-18 is in reach. Furthermore, the very proposals being put forward by the FAO is appropriate in terms of providing some sensitivity around those potential risks, which we as a government have always been addressing. It is why, for the 7th year in a row, Mr. Speaker, we're outperforming, achieving better results than previously anticipated, even with lower revenues, Mr. Speaker, and the appropriate prudence that the member opposite talks about in regards to contingencies is appropriate, and the FAO made that very clear today.
Thank you.
Back to the minister. Yes, the FAO confirmed again, Speaker, that they'll only balance by selling assets. He also reported that the government is on track to continue starving our healthcare system while we're seeing nurses fired regularly. The FAO says cost factors mean they should be increasing healthcare spending 5.2% average per year, yet they're capping it at 1.8%. Speaker, he told us that is not realistic. This government was told how their waste, mismanagement and scandal would crowd out critical spending, and now the FAO this morning confirmed that indeed has happened. Just how many more nurses will this government have to fire? How many more hospital rooms will this government have to close to balance their budget?
Thank you. Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite has just reinforced the very nature of the transformations that are being necessary to be included in our plan without sacrificing those very essential services in health care and education. It is why we are increasing health care by an additional $1 billion more, Mr. Speaker. It is why we are supporting more education, including free tuition for our most vulnerable students. It is why we're investing more than $12 billion more in capital for creating new hospitals. And it is why the FAO has stated that those are prudent measures, measures that are offsetting and mitigating the risk. The FAO highlights the fact that prudence is included in our budget. The member opposite knows that fully well, and if he doesn't, that's because he doesn't understand, Mr. Speaker.
He does not.
New question, the member from Bramalea-Gore